Many that have seen where families their lives have been shattered.
The Globe reported a couple of years ago that 1 in 5 drivers in Canada is South Asian. That number is probably even higher for Ontario.
If in fact you don't own a truck, you cannot incorporate, and now you're changing that testimony. Is that true?
Say that.
You absolutely did. You said the laws need to be modernized to allow for the... Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Gahir.
It was my line of questioning that raised this testimony. I think the witness knows what he said.
No, it's not a valid point of order.
Sure.
There have been comments about newcomer drivers feeling targeted or mistrusted during inspections. How does the CTOA think the government can make enforcement more equitable and culturally competent and less
Sure,
so we're targeting certain communities?
Yeah, I can comment on it.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18th, 2025. The committee is resuming its study of the changing landscape of truck drivers in Canada.
First, I'll start with MLA Bangu. MLA, thank you very much for your public service. I certainly appreciate you making time for our committee. I would like to first start asking you about your history. I understand that you spent a long time in heavy trucking, and your family has even longer. Could you just give us a little background as to your experience?
Thank you. So yes, I was involved in trucking before I got in politics in the gravel trucking industry, doing a lot of road work, and I have seen this be an issue firsthand. And there's a lot of issues that arise with this. There's safety concerns. There's obviously the tax that's not getting filtered down, taxpayers. And as the other member here that's was saying, that there isn't a high scale of this happening and there aren't companies that actually want this addressed. That is false. I worked in a smaller scale business. My family has been doing it in the trucking industry for a while, and this has been a constant occurrence. What a lot of people want to get addressed because it leads to lower rates. It gives people advantage of getting in there and cutting the rates. The market's always stagnant. Yes, truckers are at a big disadvantage. It's really tough, tight margins, and this just adds to that burden. And that's where I feel that we need to have this addressed completely, because businesses come to me every single day, and especially when I was a transportation critic, and they bring up these concerns time and time again. There's ways that temporary foreign workers have came in and they'll get an incorporated company, and next thing you know, they're taking loads, they're not even checking them, they're literally being extorted for work. It's really sad to see this happen. And when I have numerous calls from truckers directly involved in this, it's really concerning. And I really thank you for having me here to speak on this very important issue.
Well, and it is important. It is affecting British Columbians and Canadians. There's many that have seen where families their lives have been shattered, and not to say that there's also the issue that you've been talking about here today, where people aren't paying their taxes. I just want to really hone in, though, on your comments around the temporary foreign worker program, because we've heard that in central Canada. Could you please just elaborate a little bit more about the temporary foreign worker program and the model that's being done, and it sounds like the same kind of exploitive behaviors?
So right now what happens, the temporary foreign worker comes in, a company gets an LMI, they'll start driving for them. Later on, they'll find a way to get them a permanent residency. When they get them the permanent residency, they're like, hey, I got you a permanent residency. Now, why don't you get incorporated and we'll set up a company and I'll just pay you a flat fee. You'll run it like your own business. And the thing is, a lot of the temporary foreign newcomers, they get exploited. They get taken advantage of. There is no education concept of it to actually teach them how the business process works. How do you set up a proper business, collect tax? And another issue they end up running into is when they want to get a finance or a mortgage, buy a vehicle, they can't show the income and they don't qualify that way. And that's when the real wake-up call happens.
So we've heard earlier from our other witnesses that some drivers will incorporate for autonomy or for family time or control of the routes. But you're not talking about independent contractors that are doing bona fide operations as an incorporated company. You're talking about people that are being pushed into these situations and have none of those things. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And to say that they get to control what the times and everything, a lot of companies do run on that. You give them your availability and they'll schedule you accordingly. This isn't way back 20, 30 years as driving companies. We've adapted. We want people. We realize there's a family aspect of it. There will be days they need off. We work with with our employees all the time. And that is a very important part of this. So if you go the other route and do it through the incorporated way, what happens if you get an injury? Where do you go? What are the processes? This is what's not being told to a lot of the temporary foreign workers and people who get permanent residency and go on this way of doing business. It's setting them up for failure.
When someone pushes someone into this kind of situation, you said that they'll say, okay, I'm going to set you up with a truck. Oftentimes the truck isn't safe. They don't know, like you said, there's an education gap of what they're getting into with the liabilities that truck may have. In some cases, I've heard from truckers in Quebec where they don't even have insurance. So what kind of further problems can someone find themselves into when they're in this kind of situation?
Well, it's like you said, if there's ever an accident, where do you actually go? Where is the liability on this? And also, if it's really concerning, though, to me, that there is no actual way of having some sort of procedure that protects these drivers, their education process or something. Because I've seen this time and time after again, drivers being exploited. And when they push back, the problem is they don't want to get vocal about it because they're afraid. Some people will hold literally deportation over their head. And you tell me, if you're trying to put family money on the table for your family and kids, you're stuck in a very terrible situation. This has to be addressed.
Just to finish off, you've had the benefit of working in an industry that you said has very tight margins, so is your family. So what would you constitute this as being legitimate competition, or is it undermining the whole industry with an unsafe business model?
This has been undermining the industry. This is why you see stagnant trucking rates and truckers always complaining about why the industry is in a complete wreck and it's not profitable anymore. And if it's not profitable here, of course you're going to go down this model of temporary foreign workers where you're bringing in people, literally exploiting them to do a job that Canadians wouldn't even want to do. And that is completely unacceptable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bangu, and thank you, Mr. Albus.
The Globe reported a couple of years ago that 1 in 5 drivers in Canada is South Asian. That number is probably even higher for Ontario. A lot of those companies, those carriers call My Riding home, and a lot of those drivers are actually in My Riding as well. So again, this issue is very important. I wanted to talk about incorporation generally and talk about incorporation as a lawful and widely used model across multiple professions. And trucking is simply one of them. I feel like this model is often demonized when it's not the actual model of someone incorporating that's the problem. It's the enforcement behind that's the problem, and perhaps bad actors. But that model itself actually inherently, I don't think it's flawed. We'll talk about Drivers Inc., Mr. Vishwanth. This term means different things for different people, and so I stay away from this term. One definition that it's taken on in the last couple of years is that drivers are intentionally being misclassified, that they are not being told the benefits, the pros and cons about either model of being an employee or being incorporated, and that without being told what they are being incorporated, corporations are being opened for them, and that's sort of the model. Mr. Vishwanth, in your view, the sample size that you have of the companies that you deal with, of the drivers that you deal with, is it a widespread issue, this issue of misclassification?
The members that are part of our organization have seen a disproportionate amount of misclassification audits. Going back to the question of do the drivers know which model is better, you'd have to understand one thing. No one forces a driver to incorporate. There's no benefit from it. There's no profit from it to anyone. And CRA already has tools in its arsenal, the PSBs and the integration of T2, T1, and the T4A to weed out anybody who's cheating on tax. So there is really no profit to anyone in forcing any one person to go with an incorporated model or the other. The issue is about control. Drivers do not want to be told when to drive, where to drive, what time to show up to work, when to take a lunch break, when can they go to work. And most importantly, these people are away from their families weeks on end. So they want to arrange their time in such a manner that they can spend time with their families. But if you are an employee, you can't do that. That's one of the biggest reasons why drivers incorporate, to be able to control their own family time. The narrative, the narrative that somehow people forced them to do it has no evidentiary basis, nothing. I want to also bring to your attention the material I filed. We have a technical response to the costing model of the $1 billion, I quote, air quotes on it, loss. My model is built on proper real-world inputs that makes no arbitrage for one person to either provide services as an employee or as a contractor.
Thank you. So just on that last point, that's something that I've heard from companies, carriers themselves as well, that sometimes that this model of drivers incorporating actually ends up costing them even more. And I know of several carriers that are within my riding that, will have a mix of both. They'll have employees, they'll have incorporated drivers, and they'll give both sides access to all those employee benefits. So that in the end, that model is actually costing them a little bit more.
Yes. So the model put before this committee says it costs a company around $101,000 to provide to retain services of a driver under the employee model. But when you actually do the analysis, it costs about $96,000 to engage the same driver under an incorporation model, but you also have to take in the HST gross subs, the administrative overheads, the legal expenses required in having to deal with this misclassification audits. It actually exceeds and accounts to about $110,000 under the incorporation model. So you'd be saving when someone comes in as an employee.
Oftentimes what I hear from the carriers within my riding is that the drivers themselves are asking for this model of incorporation simply because their friends might be using this model, because that's sort of just the way that others have done it before them.
I have done this for 15 years. You can go to any company and ask them, would you hire a payroll driver? They'll say yes. But ask a driver, do you want to work under payroll? He'll say no. That is a fact.
When we talk about a tax, so this model is also demonized because the claim is made that tax is avoided in incorporation. But I think the solution, if that's happening, and to what scale that's happening, I don't know. But if it's happening, I think the solution, you had already mentioned it, is what if we just make the T4A mandatory?
Yes, you can do that. So there's some the information gap that's being provided in this, that's missed in this committee. A person filing incorporation tax status does it as a T2, but they also have to file a T1 for dividends and taxes that they file thereafter. It's called the integration model, so there is no tax loss. A person filing taxes on an incorporation model will end up paying personal taxes as well. That's the integration model.
When we talk about safety, this is something that, is that 15 seconds? 15 seconds. I'll just come back to it then.
We've used the term Drivers Inc. That somehow it's a talking point for industry. I'm speaking on behalf of the people that I represent. What about you?
Yeah, and to say it's the racial tensions, I'm a person of color myself. I'm in the trucking industry. I've had people of color tell me this needs to be addressed. It is a concern for them. Maybe if you have an LMIs come into you and you have ways to circumvent it and there's ways, maybe you don't want change. But I'll tell you, a lot of the hardworking Canadians that have came here, built a life for themselves in this industry, want to play by the rules, and they expect others to play by the rules.
So we've heard from other witnesses that when these LMIAs are gotten and offered to individual workers that are exploited, essentially they're said, there's a quid pro quo. I'll get you a vehicle, we'll get you set up with an incorporation, but you're going to work for me and you're going to be paid far less, sometimes I think 30 or 32 cents a kilometer, or maybe it's a mile for the industry. But the thing is that it's usually 72 cents for much of the rest of the industry. So it's impossible for them to compete. But also, I think it's impossible for them to basically do all the things that you expect, like maintenance of a truck. What other shortcuts do you think are being done by those that are put into these positions? What have you heard?
Well, in British Columbia, we've had a huge issue with overpass strikes and a lot of terrible accidents that have happened, unfortunately. And what we have been realizing is that a lot of the carriers do have temporary foreign workers or do have, new drivers on there. And they're literally told, hey, if you don't move this load, you're not staying in this country. This is not false. This is a reality. I have been in the industry. For people to say this does not happen is completely ludicrous, and that's where the general public realizes there's an issue right here.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm going to pass the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you, and I'll be asking questions to you, Mr. Vishwas. And so I just wanted to confirm some of your earlier testimony. You stated that the laws should be updated to allow those truck drivers who don't own trucks to incorporate. Is that correct?
I would say that would have the effect of modernizing the
So
law, yeah.
currently those who don't have trucks shouldn't be allowed to incorporate. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. That's not what the rules state. The rules say you have to take a holistic approach.
No, well, what the rules say is, according to the Supreme Court, is that there's a number of factors, but one of the key factors is ownership of tools. And it's very difficult, the Supreme Court has said, for you to be legally allowed to incorporate, you're allowed to incorporate, but you're not allowed to call yourself an independent contractor. They actually deem you to be an employee. It's very, very difficult to do that without the ownership of your tools. So as you said earlier in your testimony, you said this earlier, that the law should be changed to allow non-owning truck drivers to become incorporated. That was your testimony earlier.
No, there's two parts. First, that's not what the Supreme Court jurisprudence is, and I did not say you should change it. I said you should update it with voluntariness, because that is the problem everyone seems to have. They're saying that somehow businesses force drivers to incorporate.
With respect, sir, you said earlier, and we can read the record back to you, you said earlier that if in fact you don't own a truck, you cannot incorporate, and now you're changing that testimony. Is that true?
Say that.
You absolutely did. You said the laws need to be modernized to allow for the... Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Gahir.
Like, it was my line of questioning that raised this testimony. I think the witness knows what he said.
It's not a valid point of order.
Sure, I made my point.
This is my time, and I want my time put back.
Your time is stopped, so we're going to give you the time that you need. If there are questions as to what a witness had said, we can refer back to the notes that have been taken and to Hansard, if necessary.
And you, sir, that the laws needed to be changed to allow those truckers who do not own trucks to be allowed to incorporate. Are you now changing your testimony, sir?
Updated, sir. Not changed. You can't change the law. It probably has the same effect.
Your testimony, not your law. You're changing your testimony now.
So what exactly is your question?
So my question, you said earlier in your testimony that the laws needed to be changed to allow those who don't own trucks to become incorporated. I mean, clearly implying that in order to incorporate, you needed to own a truck. Are you now changing that testimony, sir?
No. So I think you misunderstand. That is the current ESTC approach, that if you don't own a truck or be an owner-operator, they seem deemed to classify it as an employee-employer relationship. That's their current stance on it, and I think that's wrong. Someone has to take it to the Supreme Court, and have it tested.
But it's your position of your organization that in order to be in compliance with the laws, that in order for a truck driver to incorporate, they need to own their truck.
You talked about bad carriers and, that enforcement should focus on them. Can you talk a little bit about the appropriate role for the federal government here and what the province can do to hold companies accountable?
Bad actors who don't have... So in Ontario, I can speak specifically about Ontario, the Ontario MTO administers a regime called the CVOR, Overall Violation Rating, and it is a pretty well-oiled machine. It's been in place for many, many years. And I can tell you, in the GTA, a sample size distribution of some small to medium-sized businesses, their overall violation rating is less than 5%. That puts them in the top 1 percentile of companies that operate in Ontario. So the issue is, when it comes to safety, we all share the same concern. A bad driver should be weeded out. We don't have an argument on that. But the issue is when you conflate that issue to drivering, to tax evasion, to cheats and everything else, it disproportionately affects one community. That's my problem.
And following on that, if there is misclassification that's happening, and it seems to be that there is some in the system, what is the right approach that you would recommend so that we can deal with those companies to make sure that they're not shirking their responsibilities?
The problem I have with the current ESTC approach to misclassification is they don't have a very liberal approach to it. They narrow it down to whether or not you own equipment and tools. The effect it has on drivers who don't have the financial means to own a truck is that they're squeezed out of the market. I'm saying modernize that test and update. Supreme Court has given us guidance on it. It says you take all of the factors in a holistic approach. I would specifically recommend that replace the ownership of trucks with voluntariness, because that seems to be the problem everybody has. That we somehow the small to medium-sized businesses somehow force drivers. That's not the case. Leave the voluntariness to the driver. Let the driver choose. I want to be an employee. I want to be an incorporated driver. To not allow that is to take a very paternalistic view and economic gatekeeping.
And my last question, there have been comments about newcomer drivers feeling targeted or mistrusted during inspections. How does the CTOA think the government can make enforcement more equitable and culturally competent and less so we're targeting certain communities?
Yeah, I can comment on that. Keep scales and weighing inspections to safety. Don't make it about status or about corporate documents. That is not their jurisdiction. That's the federal government's jurisdiction. Scales and weighing scales and scale inspections should be about the mechanical fitness of the truck and the driver safety, nothing else. So to do anything more would be overreaching and have, again, a disproportionate effect on people not intended to receive that.